Imagine you're tasked with directing a massive 3-hour, multi-million-dollar historical epic.
Oh, like one of those sweeping desert epics with thousands of extra.
Right, exactly. You've got the huge locations, period-accurate armor, this incredible score. But there is a massive, seemingly impossible catch.
Which is?
You are strictly forbidden from ever showing your main character's face.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, you cannot let the audience hear his voice. You can't even show his shadow on a wall.
That sounds like some bizarre avant-garde art school constraint.
It really does. I mean,
Yeah.
how do you build an emotional, character-driven historical epic when the person driving the entire narrative is basically a ghost to the audience?
You'd think it would just be impossible.
But that is exactly the constraint that birthed one of the most unique cinematic achievements of the 20th century. Welcome to the Deep Dive.
It's great to be here.
It is Sunday, May 31st, 2026, and today you and I are unpacking a true masterpiece of historical filmmaking and, honestly, cultural diplomacy.
We have our hands on a really comprehensive, incredibly detailed historical and filmic analysis of Moustapha Akkad's 1976 epic, The Message.
Which, for those who don't know, is a film about the origins of Islam.
Right. And the document we are exploring today is so fascinating because it forces us to look way past the standard movie review format.
Oh, totally. We aren't just giving this movie a star rating.
Exactly. We're dissecting how a piece of cinema attempts to translate a massive, earth-shattering social revolution onto the screen.
While also navigating some really intense religious sensitivities.
Yeah, and simultaneously attempting to act as a bridge between entirely different global cultures.
It's pulling triple duty. Now, before we really get into the weeds, I do want to set some ground rules for you, our listener.
Always a good idea with a topic like this.
Right, because what's fascinating about diving into this specific source material is that we're looking at an incredibly charged, deeply profound piece of human history.
We're talking about the birth of a major world religion here.
Exactly. And the brutal historical conflicts between an emerging social movement and this entrenched superpower.
Which naturally brings up a lot of passionate viewpoints.
Right. So to be completely clear up front, we are not here to debate theology.
No.
And we are not here to pick political or religious sides. That is simply not our mission today.
Our goal is strictly to look objectively at the source text.
Yes. To impartially unpack how this one specific filmmaker used the tools of cinema to interpret a historical revolution. We are basically analyzing the mechanics of his storytelling.
That's the perfect lens for this.
Yeah.
We are looking at the architecture of the film's narrative.
Right.
And to really understand the architecture of the message, to understand why Akkad frames the rise of early Islam as this sweeping social revolution, you have to understand the bedrock he is building on.
The status quo.
Exactly. You cannot appreciate a revolution if you don't understand the terrifying strength of the establishment it's trying to overthrow.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the source text spends a lot of time laying out the historical and social conditions of 7th century Arabia.
It really paints a vivid picture.
Yeah, and if we're setting the stage in pre-Islamic Mecca, what does that world actually look like? Because I'll be honest, my mental image is just, endless desert and isolated nomads.
I think that's the mental image a lot of people have, but the analysis paints a very different picture.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, the nomadic element existed, certainly. But Mecca itself was an absolute powerhouse.
How so?
Well, historians describe 7th century Arabia as a region completely lacking any kind of centralized nation-state government.
So no king, no federal army.
Right. No universal constitution.
Yeah.
Society was entirely organized around tribal affiliations.
Like a family bloodlines?
Exactly. It was this dense, complex web of kinship networks and fiercely protected local loyalties. But Mecca was the crown jewel of all this because it functioned as a massive commercial hub.
Wait, I'm stuck on something basic here. If there is no centralized government to, build roads or enforce laws or mint a standard currency, how does a city in a harsh desert environment become a massive, wealthy commercial hub? What is the economic engine there?
The engine is this brilliant combination of geography and religious infrastructure.
Okay, geography I get. Trade routes.
Right. Mecca sat right on these incredibly lucrative trade routes connecting southern Arabia, which had all the spices and incense, to the Byzantine and Sasanian empires up north.
And they had endless appetites for those luxury goods.
Oh, absolutely. But the real genius of Mecca's economy was the Kaaba,
The religious sanctuary.
Yes.
Yes.
The religious landscape of the Arabian Peninsula at this time was highly diverse. You had many different tribes practicing various forms of polytheism.
Right.
And the Kaaba in Mecca housed hundreds of idols representing the different gods of all these various tribes.
Okay, so it's drawing everyone in.
Exactly. And the Quraysh, which was the dominant tribe that essentially ruled Mecca, instituted this really clever system.
What did they do?
During certain months of the year, they declared that all tribal violence and blood feuds were strictly forbidden within the sanctuary.
Oh, wow. So the Kaaba wasn't just a spiritual center.
No, not at all.
It was a neutral zone. It was basically a massive convention center where tribes who normally hated each other could come safely to worship their specific idols.
And more importantly, to trade without getting murdered.
That is wild.
That is the exact mechanism. By controlling the Kaaba, the Quraysh controlled the ultimate safe haven marketplace.
So the pilgrimage season brought in massive influxes of wealth.
Staggering fortunes. The Quraysh merchants accumulated so much wealth through these trade routes and the pilgrimage economy.
So they essentially controlled everything.
Everything. They controlled the flow of capital, they negotiated the intertribal alliances, and they managed the religious center.
So if I'm putting this into a modern context for you, the listener, pre-Islamic Mecca is basically a massive, entirely unregulated corporate monopoly.
That is a brilliant way to look at it.
And the elite families of the Quraysh tribe are the board of directors. They hold an absolute horizontal and vertical monopoly.
Exactly.
They control the trade routes, which is the economy. They control the tribal alliances, which is the politics. And they control the Kaaba, which is the culture and religion.
And when a single entity controls the economy, the politics, and the religion, the resulting social hierarchy is going to be incredibly rigid.
Like zero social mobility.
Right. The source analysis really emphasizes this. Because the Quraysh elite controlled all the capital and the infrastructure, the wealth disparity was extreme.
So if you aren't on the board of directors, you are basically nothing.
Completely marginalized. Women, the impoverished, orphans, and the vast population of enslaved people were entirely locked out of the profit sharing.
Wow.
They existed at the absolute bottom of a brutal vertical power structure with no legal protections outside of whatever their specific tribal affiliation might afford them.
Which, for the marginalized, was often nothing at all.
Often nothing.
And what our source points out is that Moustapha Akkad's film does not bury this context. The message deliberately and aggressively shoves this extreme wealth disparity right into the audience's face from the very beginning.
It really does. The visual contrast is stunning.
Yeah, the camera just lingers on the opulence of the Quraysh leaders.
Yeah.
The silks, the banquets, the sheer arrogance of their power.
And then it starkly contrasts that with the suffering of the enslaved and the poor in the streets.
It's a very intentional directorial choice to set the stakes, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The film needs you to feel the unbearable weight of this monopoly.
Because if the Quraysh hold total undisputed control over every facet of society, you have to ask yourself, what happens when a disruptive new movement arrives?
A movement that doesn't just want a seat at the table.
Right, a movement that wants to smash the table entirely.
That's where you get the spark of a massive revolution. And that brings us to how the message portrays the initial impact of Islam.
Yeah, the source text breaks down how the early scenes of the movie focus heavily on the Prophet Muhammad's initial public teachings.
He's calling for monotheism, he's calling for profound social justice, and he's demanding moral accountability.
And here is where the analysis points out a crucial historical argument that the film is making.
Which is?
When Muhammad begins preaching that there is only one God, and that all human beings are equal in the eyes of that God, the Quraysh leaders absolutely lose their minds.
Oh, they panic.
But the film makes it clear that their outrage is not just a polite theological disagreement.
No, they aren't sitting in a tent debating philosophy.
No, they are terrified. And honestly, looking at the mechanics of the monopoly we just talked about, it makes perfect sense.
It's basic economics for them.
Right. If I am the CEO of Quraysh Inc., and my entire multi-billion-dollar economy is based on tribes bringing tribute to hundreds of different idols housed in my sanctuary.
Yeah.
And a man stands up in the town square and says, there's only one God, and all of those idols in the Kaaba are meaningless pieces of stone.
He's threatening to bankrupt the city.
He is destroying the tourism industry. If the idols are fake, the pilgrimage stops. If the pilgrimage stops, the neutral trading zone collapses.
And if the trading zone collapses, the Quraysh lose all their wealth and all their political leverage over the other tribes.
It is an existential economic threat.
It is. But it goes even deeper than the economics of the Kaaba, too.
How so?
The source highlights that Muhammad's call for social justice, the idea that the enslaved person is spiritually equal to the tribal leader, that was just as dangerous.
Because it threatened the cheap labor force.
Exactly. It threatened the cheap labor force and the strict social hierarchy that the Quraysh relied on to maintain their dominance. The idea that the wealthy have a moral obligation to care for the poor and the orphan, that was radical.
So the film is framing the rise of Islam not just as an internal spiritual awakening for individuals, but as a sweeping, systemic social reform.
That's the core of Akkad's interpretation.
The Quraysh are terrified because their entire power structure is built on a foundation of inequality, and Islam is arriving with a sledgehammer aimed right at that foundation.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, this touches on a fascinating point of historical scholarship mentioned in the text.
Right, because historians still argue about this, don't they?
Oh, fiercely. Today, modern historians still debate the exact ratio of factors that drove the explosive rise of early Islam.
Like, was it mostly economic?
Was it an economic revolt? Was it a political consolidation? Was it a purely spiritual and theological paradigm shift? It is this incredibly complex web of human motivations.
But the film doesn't really have time for a nuanced academic debate.
It's a movie. It has to make a choice.
Right. Akkad's film distinctly plants its flag in the idea that social reform was the absolute core driver of the movement's early friction and ultimate appeal.
The movie makes a deliberate thematic choice to emphasize the social and economic anxieties of the antagonists.
Yeah, throughout the first act, you constantly hear the Quraysh leaders expressing fears that these new teachings will undermine their profits.
They complain it will destroy their traditions and upend the social order that keeps them rich.
It's the classic, explosive clash between a heavily armed status quo and a disruptive new paradigm.
But here is the challenge for a filmmaker.
Yeah.
You can't just have characters standing around reciting economic theory and sociology essays for 3 hours.
No, that's a textbook, not a movie.
Exactly. To make an audience truly feel the weight of this massive social upheaval, you need a human face.
Actually, you need multiple faces, right, to personify the two extremes of this shifting society.
Yes. You need an avatar for the historically marginalized who are being crushed by the monopoly, and you need an avatar for the mighty establishment.
And the film solves this narrative problem masterfully by elevating two vital historical figures, Bilal ibn Rabah and Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib.
The source analysis actually dedicates a significant amount of space to contrasting these two characters.
Because they serve completely different, yet equally essential historical and narrative functions in the story of this revolution.
Exactly. Let's start with Bilal. The source text explains his background, and it is just brutal.
Yeah, Bilal was an enslaved man of Ethiopian descent living in Mecca.
And when he secretly embraces the new message of Islam, his owner discovers it.
And what follows is horrific.
It really is. Bilal is subjected to incredibly severe, prolonged public torture in the blistering desert heat, all to force him to renounce his new faith.
Bilal carries an enormous amount of symbolic weight in the message. As a character, he represents the historically excluded.
He is the visual embodiment of everyone who lacked power, status, or legal protection in pre-Islamic Arabian society.
And the film does not shy away from the brutality of his suffering.
No, but that suffering is deployed to create a stark moral contrast for the audience.
It forces you to look at the two systems side by side.
Right. On one hand, you have the cruelty of the Quraysh elite, who are literally crushing a man under a boulder in the sand just to violently enforce their social hierarchy.
And on the other hand, you have the dignity and radical equality being offered by this new movement.
The visual language of those torture scenes is so vital. The text emphasizes Bilal's refusal to abandon his faith.
Even while being crushed, he simply repeats, one,
referring to the oneness of God. And that is not just an emotional character moment to make the audience feel sympathy.
No, it's bigger than that.
It is a symbolic representation of the unstoppable strength of a movement that is finally offering humanity and dignity to people who have been treated as expendable property for centuries.
His resilience is actually terrifying to the elite.
Why is that?
Because if you can't torture the lowest person in society into obeying you, your monopoly is already broken. Your power is an illusion.
That is a brilliant way to phrase the psychological threat he posed. Historically, Bilal is frequently cited by scholars as the prime example of early Islam's ability to cut completely across social and ethnic boundaries.
And the film uses his screen time to cement this interpretation.
Right, that the early Muslim community functioned as a refuge, and a profound source of empowerment for the most oppressed members of society.
But, let's be realistic about how historical revolutions actually work. A movement built entirely of the marginalized, no matter how morally righteous or incredibly resilient they are, usually gets slaughtered if they are facing a heavily armed, deeply entrenched corporate monopoly.
Sadly, yes. Moral high ground doesn't deflect swords.
Right. A grassroots movement needs a different kind of asset to survive its infancy. And that brings us to the other end of the social spectrum. Hamza.
Hamza ibn Abd al-Muttalib comes from a completely different universe than Bilal.
Yeah, he's the uncle of the Prophet Muhammad, right?
He is, but more importantly for the social dynamics of Mecca, he is a fiercely respected warrior. He's a master hunter and a prominent member of the Quraysh elite. He is a nobleman.
He's on the board of directors? Or, well, at least he has VIP access to the boardroom.
He definitely does. And the source makes a very important analytical distinction here regarding his role in the film.
Which is?
A modern audience might be tempted to view Hamza simply as the classic action hero. The charismatic rogue who rides in with a sword to save the helpless villagers.
Right, the movie star role.
Exactly. But his historical and narrative function is far more complex than just providing action scenes.
Because his conversion to Islam isn't just about one guy deciding to change his beliefs. It changes the geopolitical math of the entire city.
His conversion is the sociological tipping point of the film. Hamza represents the expansion of the movement beyond the marginalized and the dispossessed.
Oh, that makes sense.
When a figure with Hamza's immense social capital and physical prowess publicly aligns himself with the Muslims, it proves that this movement is now capable of fracturing the elite class itself.
It lends immediate legitimacy.
Legitimacy and, crucially, physical deterrence.
Physical deterrence.
Yeah, in a tribal society, harming a man like Hamza or anyone under his direct protection would invite immediate, devastating tribal warfare.
Oh, right. The blood feuds.
Exactly. The Quraysh leaders could torture an enslaved man like Bilal with impunity, but they cannot lay a finger on Hamza without risking their own destruction.
Wow. So his presence in the narrative symbolizes the exact historical moment the Muslim community transforms from a persecuted underground religious minority into an organized, viable political entity.
An entity that the establishment is forced to actually negotiate with.
I look at Bilal and Hamza like the twin engines required to launch any successful historical movement.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, Bilal represents that fierce, unyielding grassroots engine. He is the moral core, the voice of the oppressed, demanding justice from the bottom up.
Right.
But Hamza represents the high-profile establishment endorsement. He is the engine of political capital and hard power from the top down.
He forces the status quo to take the movement seriously, because suddenly the movement has teeth.
You really need both engines firing to actually change the fabric of society.
That is an excellent synthesis of what the film's character architecture is trying to convey. Historical change requires that alignment.
The uncompromising moral endurance of the ordinary people.
Coupled with the strategic protection of established figures who are willing to cross the aisle and dismantle their own privilege.
But every great cinematic movement needs a brick wall to drive those engines into, right?
Literally.
If Bilal and Hamza are the faces of the revolution, we have to look closely at the antagonists. We have to look at how the film depicts the defenders of the old world order.
The analysis focuses heavily on the film's portrayal of the Quraysh leadership, specifically zeroing in on characters like Abu Sufyan and his fiercely determined wife, Hind.
And they are presented as the ultimate defenders of the existing social monopoly.
Yes, and the movie paints them as utterly ruthless.
They are depicted as calculating, deeply arrogant defenders of their own economic privilege, their tribal authority, and their traditional ways.
They orchestrate boycotts, torture, and eventually outright war to crush the Muslims.
But, I have to push back on this framing a little bit.
Okay, let's hear it.
As an observer of history, doesn't this feel a bit too, easy? Too black and white?
In what way?
History is almost never just greedy, mustache-twirling villains versus perfect, noble reformers. It's always infinitely messier, filled with gray areas and competing legitimate interests.
This raises an important question. And the friction you're feeling there is entirely justified. It's actually a major focal point of the source text analysis.
Oh, really? So the source agrees it's simplified?
You are absolutely right to push back. Real history is exceptionally messy. The analysis notes that contemporary historical scholarship shows the conflict between the Meccan establishment and the early Muslims was far more nuanced and complex than the stark dichotomy we see on screen.
Okay, so what are we missing in the movie then? What was really driving the antagonists?
Well, the resistance to Muhammad was not simply born out of pure cartoonish villainy or blind greed. The Meccan leadership was engaged in highly complex political calculations.
Like what?
Remember that delicate intertribal peace treaty centered around the Kaaba?
Neutral zone, yeah.
There were genuine, terrifying concerns among the Quraysh leaders about regional stability. If they suddenly abandon the polytheistic idols of all their neighboring tribes and declare them false, they risk instantly alienating every military and economic ally they have.
Oh, wow. So they risk plunging the entire Arabian Peninsula into a massive apocalyptic trade war.
Exactly. It's a terrifying geopolitical risk. They aren't just protecting their wallets, they think they are preventing a regional collapse.
They honestly believe they're holding society together.
Yes. They were also deeply concerned with maintaining the structural integrity of the tribal system itself, which, however flawed, was the only social safety net that existed in that harsh environment.
Right, if you don't have your tribe, you die in the desert.
Exactly. If you braid tribal loyalty in favor of religious loyalty, the old men of the Quraysh feared society would just dissolve into total anarchy.
So there was a tremendous amount of realpolitik, diplomacy, and legitimate fear of the unknown happening behind the scenes that the film mostly brushes past.
It really does.
Okay, so this brings up a huge question about the director's choices. Moustapha Akkad went to incredible lengths to make this film authentic. He built massive sets, consulted historians, used thousands of extras.
He was meticulous.
If he cared so much about authenticity, why flatten the antagonists? Why boil down these incredibly complex geopolitical trade algorithms into just arrogant elites protecting their privilege?
Because of the ruthless mechanics of the medium itself.
What do you mean?
Film is not an academic journal. Film is a medium of emotion, pacing, and moral narrative.
Right, you only have 3 hours.
By simplifying those dense, highly technical political calculations into a stark, easily digestible moral contrast. Social injustice and cruelty on one side, social reform and equality on the other, the film becomes infinitely more effective at communicating its central thesis to a massive global audience.
I mean, if he bogs the script down in a 45-minute boardroom scene about the fluctuating prices of Byzantine silk and the nuances of tribal treaty negotiations.
The audience goes to sleep.
Yeah, you lose everyone.
Precisely. Akkad's core argument is that historical change happens when emerging visions of human reform clash with entrenched power.
And the simplification of the villains serves that broader thematic truth of the film.
It crystallizes the conflict so the audience can emotionally invest in the stakes, even if it intentionally smooths over the jagged edges of historical realpolitik.
That makes total sense. It is the fundamental difference between reading a dense socioeconomic history book and watching a cinema epic.
Exactly. A movie needs you to viscerally feel the weight of the injustice so you can cheer for the arrival of the reform.
And we have spent a lot of time now analyzing the orbit of this revolution. We've talked about the marginalized like Bilal, the mighty defectors like Hamza, and the fierce antagonists like Abu Sufyan and Hind.
We have analyzed everyone circling the gravitational center of this movement.
But we haven't talked about the sun at the center of the solar system.
No, we haven't.
We haven't talked about the leader of this entire revolution. And that brings us back to the hook we started with. This leads us to what the source text identifies as the film's most staggering, utterly unique cinematic choice.
The unseen center. The invisible protagonist.
The constraint that seems completely impossible. Here's where it gets really interesting. The message makes the incredibly famous, audacious decision to never, ever depict the Prophet Muhammad visually on screen.
Which is just wild to think about.
The man who starts the movement, who leads the armies, who preaches the message, you never see his face, you never see his body, you never hear his voice.
And this was not an artistic whim, to be clear.
Yeah, not at all.
This choice was made out of deep respect for strict Islamic traditions that strongly discouraged the visual representation of prophets to prevent any form of idolatry.
Right.
Moustapha Akkad, wanting the film to be accepted by the Muslim world, chose to adhere to this restriction completely. He entirely avoided showing Muhammad and also avoided showing his closest family members and his most prominent early successors, like Ali, Abu Bakr, and Omar.
Which, purely from a logistical filmmaking standpoint, is mind-boggling. I mean, I cannot overstate how hard it is to direct a scene when your main character is in the room but isn't allowed to be on camera.
It requires an entirely new approach to directing.
How do they actually execute this practically in the movie?
The director uses a variety of ingenious cinematic workarounds. Often, the camera itself acts as the point of view of the prophet.
Oh, like a first-person perspective.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The actors will look directly into the camera lens to speak to him, and then pause, nodding as if listening to a reply the audience cannot hear.
That's clever.
Or the camera will be positioned just behind a camel, or just outside a tent, showing the reactions of the crowd to a speech that is occurring just off-screen.
And there's a specific musical cue too, right?
Yes. Maurice Jarre's incredible score often uses a very specific, resonant organ motif to signify the presence or arrival of the prophet in a scene.
So replacing physical presence with an auditory aura. It's like filming a 3-hour Superman movie, but you only ever see the citizens of Metropolis looking up at the sky, reacting to the buildings being saved.
Yeah.
You see the shock and awe on their faces, but you never actually see the cape. It is a colossal, unprecedented constraint for a director to willingly take on.
It is, but what the source text unpacks here is absolutely brilliant. It explores the profound historical and thematic implications of this choice.
So it's not just a neat trick.
No. Akkad took a severe religious limitation and turned it into a massive philosophical statement.
How so?
By legally and religiously removing the central figure as a visible character, the film inadvertently, or perhaps very intentionally, forces the invention of a completely new cinematic language for historical epics, one where the crowd is the protagonist.
Oh, that is a fantastic insight, because I literally cannot look at the great leader standing at the podium. My eyes have nowhere else to go but to the faces of the people listening to him.
Exactly.
I have to look at Bilal's reaction. I have to look at Hamza's face.
Right. By rendering the leader invisible, the narrative organically and inevitably shifts away from being about the extraordinary, charismatic traits of one single man.
It becomes about the community.
Yes, it becomes entirely about the shared beliefs, the communal suffering, and the collective social movement of the people. It reinforces the exact thesis we discussed earlier.
That history is a massive, grinding process shaped by ordinary people.
Rather than just being a top-down biography of one extraordinary individual dictating events to passive followers.
It completely dismantles the great man theory of history on film. It's like, if the director is legally forbidden from showing us the wind, we are forced to spend 3 hours intimately getting to know the trees.
That is a beautiful way to put it.
We watch how the branches bend, how the leaves are stripped away, how the roots dig deeper into the soil. We experience the power of the invisible force entirely through the transformation of the people it touches.
It is a breathtaking cinematic achievement. But as an objective analysis, the source text does point out that this brilliant workaround comes with a cost.
You cannot remove the central figure of a movement without creating a limitation in what your narrative can achieve.
Exactly.
So what gets lost in the process?
The intimacy. Because of these religious restrictions, viewers completely miss out on the personal dimensions of Muhammad's life and leadership.
We don't get the quiet character moments.
No, we don't get to see his private doubts, his internal struggles, or his intimate family relationships. We never see him agonizing over a decision in the quiet of the night.
So we only learn about his characteristics indirectly.
Through the public testimony of his companions or the public actions they take in his name.
So the movie essentially sacrifices the private biography to preserve the public history.
Precisely. The film becomes an exclusively public chronicle of communal transformation. And the source text is careful to point out that this isn't necessarily a flaw or a weakness of the film.
Right. It's a direct reflection of its commitment to balancing narrative storytelling with deep religious respect.
But as analytical viewers, it is crucial to recognize what is absent, because it demonstrates how cultural and religious considerations can physically alter the architecture of the media we consume.
And because the film is structurally forced to focus entirely on this public, communal transformation, it makes perfect sense that the director has to reframe all the major historical milestones to reflect that collective journey.
That is the logical next step in the film's construction.
The events themselves have to carry the emotional weight of the narrative, since we can't project that emotion onto the face of the main character.
Exactly, and the source text highlights this beautifully in its section on reframing history. Every major historical event in the film is interpreted through this specific lens of collective social transformation.
Let's look at the Hijra, for example.
Okay.
The famous migration of the early Muslims from Mecca to the city of Medina. If you were just reading a dry, bullet point timeline of history, you might naturally view this event as just a physical escape.
Sure, they're running from danger.
Right. The Muslims are being heavily persecuted, the torture is escalating, assassinations are being planned, so they pack up and flee to another city to survive. It looks like a tactical retreat.
But the film absolutely refuses to present it as a simple retreat or a desperate relocation. The expert analysis shows that the message frames the Hijra as a proactive, deeply intentional, revolutionary act.
Oh, wow.
It is depicted as the active creation of a brand new social and political community. The film shows the Muslims leaving behind their homes, their wealth, and crucially, their old tribal affiliations in Mecca.
They are severing the old monopoly's control over them.
Exactly. They march into the desert to intentionally found a new society in Medina, a society based not on bloodlines or commercial wealth, but on shared faith, mutual support, and equality.
The film frames the migration as the ultimate triumph of their social reform.
Yes, they couldn't fix the monopoly in Mecca, so they walked into the desert and built a better system from scratch.
And the film does the exact same thematic reframing with the military conflicts, doesn't it? The major historical battles of Badr, Uhud, and the Trench.
It definitely does.
Because in a standard Hollywood sword and sandal epic, these would just be your big blowout action set pieces.
Oh yeah, they would be filmed to highlight tactical brilliance, heroic duels, and territorial conquest.
But Akkad films them differently.
Very differently. The source notes that while the battles are epic in scale, they are consistently framed as desperate existential struggles over the moral and social future of Arabia.
So when the vastly outnumbered Muslims face the Meccan army at Badr, the film doesn't focus on the glory of conquest.
No, it focuses on the sheer terror of the community facing the possibility of annihilation.
They aren't fighting for land. They are fighting for the right of their new social paradigm to exist.
Exactly. And the source points out that the film interprets victory and defeat in these battles through a very specific lens.
How so?
When they suffer a devastating setback at the Battle of Uhud, the film focuses on the communal grief and the moral lessons learned about discipline and unity, rather than just the tactical military failure.
So victory is measured by communal perseverance and moral conviction, not just body counts or territory gained.
Exactly.
So even the massive cavalry charges and sword fights are fundamentally about social reform.
Yes, every clash of steel is a clash of ideologies.
It is incredibly cohesive. Everything from the side characters to the camera angles hiding the protagonists to the framing of the battle scenes, it all serves this one unrelenting central argument about a collective moral struggle against an unjust monopoly.
It is a masterclass in thematic discipline. But here is the critical pivot in our deep dive.
Okay, let's hear it.
This deliberate, highly controlled framing wasn't just engineered for the sake of writing a tight script. The source text makes it abundantly clear that Moustapha Akkad's creative choices were aimed directly at the audiences sitting in movie theaters in 1976.
Right, we have to look at the world the movie was released into. The final major section of our analysis deals with the film's legacy and its immense function as a tool for cultural diplomacy.
We really need to explore its dual purpose and how it bridged the gap between two very different global audiences.
Muslim audiences and Western non-Muslim audiences.
Exactly. Let's examine the Muslim reception first. When the film was released, it generated massive, unprecedented attention across the Islamic world.
I can imagine.
And the source notes that among many Muslim viewers and scholars, the film was highly praised and deeply emotionally resonant.
Because no one had ever attempted to put this history on screen at this scale before.
Never. And it was celebrated specifically for its painstaking, respectful treatment of sacred history. Moustapha Akkad knew he was walking a tightrope.
Oh, definitely.
He went to extraordinary lengths during production to ensure theological accuracy. He actively consulted with top religious scholars from various traditions.
Like submitting scripts for review.
Yes, including scholars from Al-Azhar University in Cairo. He was submitting page after page of the script to ensure the film remained rigorously consistent with Islamic teachings and historical records.
But, you know, anytime you touch sacred history, you are going to get friction. It wasn't universally embraced without a single complaint, right?
No, and the source text is honest about this. There was an ongoing, robust debate among critics and scholars about whether any commercial film medium could ever adequately or respectfully represent sacred history.
Which is a totally fair question.
Some religious authorities questioned specific historical omissions or debated the portrayal of certain events.
Yeah.
But as an analytical observer, you have to realize that this friction is inevitable.
Right. You were taking centuries of deep, complex theology, massive geopolitical shifts, and the profound spiritual experiences of millions of people, and you are aggressively compressing it into a 3-hour commercial cinematic narrative.
You have to leave things out. You have to simplify. Debates are going to happen.
Exactly. But the sheer fact that the film sparked those high-level debates while simultaneously becoming a beloved classic in many Muslim households speaks to the massive impact it had.
It does. But then we have to turn our attention to the Western audience.
And this is where the cultural diplomacy aspect of the analysis really shines.
Yes, we have to remember the context of the 1970s.
Right. You have the OPEC oil crisis, massive geopolitical tension in the Middle East.
And a Western media landscape where Islam was heavily misunderstood, frequently misrepresented through crude stereotypes, or just entirely ignored.
The average Western moviegoer in 1976 knew almost nothing about the history of the Arabian Peninsula.
And that vacuum of knowledge is exactly what Moustapha Akkad wanted to fill. For Western audiences, the message was intentionally designed to act as a vital bridge.
He wanted to educate without lecturing.
The source text emphasizes that Akkad, who lived and worked in Hollywood, actively wanted to use the spectacle of big-budget cinema to build bridges of understanding between deeply divided civilizations.
He knew that a lecture wouldn't work, a textbook wouldn't work.
No.
But a sweeping, beautiful Hollywood epic with Anthony Quinn playing Hamza, that gets people into the theater.
Exactly. He wanted to shatter misconceptions. He wanted to offer a nuanced, dignified, and historically grounded portrayal of early Islam to an audience that was otherwise being fed a diet of political caricatures.
So bringing all this together, what does this massive filmic analysis ultimately reveal to us?
What's the takeaway?
It reveals that by intentionally focusing his film on universal human themes, the fight for justice against a corrupt monopoly, the absolute demand for human equality, the resilience of faith, and the inherent dignity of the marginalized themes that resonate fiercely with any audience anywhere in the world. Akkad wasn't just telling a dusty story about the 7th century.
He was making an urgent statement about the 20th century.
Right.
The film proves a fundamental truth about historical cinema.
Mm-hmm.
The movies we make about the past often reflect the contemporary desires of their creators just as much as they reflect historical realities.
Akkad's contemporary desire was peace, mutual respect, and cultural diplomacy.
And he meticulously engineered the historical narrative of a 7th century social revolution to try and manifest that understanding in the modern world.
It is a monumental achievement. When you look at the mechanics we've unpacked today, the message is so much more than just a movie.
It really is.
It is a profound historical interpretation of a movement as a revolutionary social force. It is a masterclass in overcoming seemingly impossible cinematic constraints, and it stands as a major, enduring modern cultural statement.
According to the source analysis we've explored today, it remains one of the most significant, ambitious historical films ever produced, precisely because it successfully navigated the impossible intersection of thrilling historical storytelling, deep religious respect, and urgent contemporary relevance.
It has been an absolutely incredible journey unpacking this massive document with you today.
With a pleasure.
We have traversed an incredible amount of ground. We started with the unregulated, oppressive corporate monopolies of pre-Islamic Mecca. We examined the twin engines of grassroots resilience in Bilal and elite political power in Hamza.
We explored the complex realpolitik of the antagonists.
And we traced how an invisible protagonist forced the invention of a new cinematic language, all culminating in a massive act of global cultural diplomacy.
It is a perfect example of why we have to analyze the media we consume to understand the deeper forces shaping the narrative.
But before we officially wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you, our listener, with a lingering thought to chew on.
A final takeaway.
We talked at length today about how the message completely reshapes our understanding of a historical movement by ripping its central figure out of the spotlight.
Right, by making him invisible to the audience.
By legally refusing to show the leader, the film forces us to watch the people he inspired instead. It forces us to measure the impact of the movement solely through the transformation of the crowd.
It completely challenges our traditional perspective on how history is made.
It really does. It makes you wonder, what other massive historical events, what other revolutions or cultural shifts might we understand entirely differently if we stopped obsessively looking at the person standing at the podium and forced ourselves to focus entirely on the faces of the crowd?
It's a powerful thought.
It's like we said at the very beginning. You can't always see the wind, But if you watch the trees closely enough, you can see exactly which way it's blowing and just how strong it really is. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and we'll see you next time.